George Fouet, or Bubbles as he was called, was a character nobody could forget once they met him. A tall, rough-looking chap with a knowledge of just about everything. Going back to his younger days in the 1930s, Bubbles was for a period happily married to Doris. They had a baby boy called Pat, and for some time things went well. Sadly, however, just after the Second World War, Bubbles and his wife Doris split up, and his son Pat was told never to speak to his father Bubbles again. Pat was, however, never deterred, although he received quite a few whacks from his mother for disobeying orders. Pat used to see his father quite often, and at every opportunity wandered along to the almshouses, which was where Bubbles lived. This place was always a mess, but Pat always got a mug of tea and a slice of toast, and always had a great chat with his father. Bubbles, being unemployed for most of his career, was often in trouble for bait digging on the side. He was also caught a few times on Betsanger Colliery Tip, where he found coal for his fire, bringing it back on his old carrier bike. Pat's mother called Bubbles the other one. She would often say the other one was in the Mercury, hadn't been fined again, but Bubbles was what he was, and never harmed anyone. He often left a bag of sprats or herring at his ex-wife's door. These old bikes shown here in the film were always on hire and could be located by Dill Pier in the late 1940s. It was a treat for Pat to have his uncle give him a lift back to the pier on one of these old bikes, and he always sat in the middle and said he was never more terrified of anything in all his life. Bubbles operated the motorboat Ida, in which he took out fishing parties. He absolutely hated getting wet though, a strange sensation for a boatman, but you could always recognise him when he was at sea, as he was always stood up in the stern, a great big hulking figure. In the 1950s, Bubbles took on the job of night watchman when the new sea wall was being built at North Dill. In the daytime he was beach help for Mr. Abel, who owned the Dill Marine Craft. Mr. Abel, or Bob as he was known, had a small fleet of boats at the top of Brewer Street, and all were painted blue and white. The fleet was called the Blue Line. A character and a half, Bubbles would get us young lads to pull the woods and wire down ready for the boats coming ashore, and after hauling up was finished, we'd be lucky to get 3 pence for 4 boats, Bubbles putting the rest in his own pocket. Bubbles was also an expert at stripping down and rebuilding the Kelvin Ricardo engines, which were used in the boats in those old days. When I worked at Dill Marine Craft, he taught me a lot on engines, but like Pat, I often got a slap across the head if I answered him back or did the job wrong. Both Bubbles and his ex-wife Doris lived out their lives in Dill. They were divorced for over 25 years and they hardly spoke to each other. Uncannily, they both died separately on the same day, the 28th of October 1973. Bubbles was a Catholic and Doris Church of England. The 2 funerals were held at the same time, on the other side of the cemetery. It's a strange world. George Fouet, or Bubbles as he was called, was another one of the great characters that frequented Dill seafront and the beach in the days when Dill was a thriving fishing community.